Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Jock here. This is Deadly Departed. And I want to ask you all a question. Have you ever had an out of body experience? And has this been an experience that really had transformed your life in any way? Or did you feel afraid of it? Or did you just think it was a dream? My guest today has been researching out of body experiences for many, many, many years, has written two books, Navigating Out of Body Experiences and Awareness, wait a minute, Avenues of the Human Spirit. Graham Nicholls, welcome to Deadly Departed. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Good to be here.
Well, finally, at last, I've been trying to get you on here for a long time, but we'll skip we'll skip that part with COVID and God knows everything else that was happening. Now, there's people out there that obviously know you, right? Because you're well known in the field of out of body experience and research. But there's going to be a lot of people here, and there's a lot of new people in Paranormal Daily News that don't know your work, don't know your experiences. So if you don't mind jumping into a little bit of, how did you get into this field? What happened to you as a young child? Anything like that? Just dive in.
Well, I guess it all starts when I'm about 5 years old. Not initially with out of body experiences, but with seeing an apparition initially in the doorway of the flat, the tower block flat that I grew up in. And I remember being very scared. I didn't know what it was. I went down onto ground level to try and get some sort of solidity and feel better or whatever. And I remember turning around and trying to call out to my parents, and I turned around and it was still there. Looking back on that, there was nothing actually scary. It just sort of stood there, and it was almost like felt like a messenger or something. It was at the threshold
Mm.
between the inside of the flat and the outside. Um, so I guess that was what started me in this interest or curiosity, I should say, maybe related to this sort of area. And then when I was around 11 or 12, I had spontaneous out of body experiences, two or three of them, in which I found myself maybe about half a mile from where I was living. So it wasn't in my bedroom. It wasn't floating above myself looking back, like the classic descriptions that
Mm.
people gave about body experiences. I was out of my flat and I was quite away from it, near the school that I was going to at the time. And I was hovering around a meter or so, well, half a meter maybe, not very high, but a little bit off the ground, and was looking all around me. It was very vivid, but it didn't last very long, and I came back to my physical body. So obviously that was a pretty unusual experience, and I didn't
Mm.
know where to put that or what that was. I didn't have the language for it. I'd never heard of out of body experiences. I'd never heard of astral projection. My family were not religious or interested in paranormal things or anything. They were very ordinary working class family. So I had nowhere really to draw upon, and I pretty much put it in the back of my mind for a while. But then maybe about a year later, I came across a maybe an article or a mention of it on a
Mm.
TV program or something like that, that there was such a thing as out of body experiences. And so I went out and I looked for a book on the subject, and I got a book on the subject by a parapsychologist called Janet Lee Mitchell. And then that really started me on my interest and journey. And then I got interested in all other paranormal areas. I got initiated into witchcraft and started doing
Whoa,
all
really?
kinds of,
You got initiated into witchcraft?
yeah,
Wow. All right. Tell us a little bit
yeah,
about that. Did
when I
that
was when I was a teenager.
and I take it that was light witchcraft, not dark witchcraft, or what was the?
Well, I don't really think there's such a thing as dark
Yeah. All
witchcraft,
right.
really. You know, I mean, what's the point of doing it? You know, it's Yeah, it was a coven.
Wow.
It was a family orientated coven.
Yeah.
So there was some other people my age in the group, as well as their parents and stuff. So they trained me in different aspects of, including giving me tips and things on out of body experiences and all those kinds of things. They were
All right.
interested in a lot of areas like Kabbalah, esoteric ideas, like theosophy and things
Uh-huh.
like that. So it taught me a lot and gave me a foundation from which I progressed. And then when I got a bit older, I joined a Golden Dawn group, so it kind of developed in that way.
So have you studied a lot of Crowley's work as well from the Golden
Yeah,
Dawn or from his own? Yeah.
Crowley was a big influence. Yeah.
Was he really? Wow. I used to live very close to his home in Inverness, in Boleskine House.
Oh, Bullskin, yeah,
Yeah. Absolutely. I've been in Boleskine
where
House. I
he
didn't.
where he tried to do the great work.
Yeah. And I never found anything. I have held his cane as well to
Oh,
someone that
nice.
had a cane, and it was a woman who basically worked in Boleskine House at the time as well. She lived in that area. I lived in Druid Temple, which is like 5 minutes away from the house. So, and a friend of mine, uh, John, was part of the Ozzy Osbourne band, and he used to have a house just up the road from Boleskine as well. So he would tell me all
Well, of
sorts of.
course, Ozzy Osbourne didn't like Crowley. He can't even pronounce his name correctly.
No, and when he did the song Mr. Crowley, it was John Sinclair that was doing the keyboards and stuff like that in there. So that's interesting. It's
So
interesting.
there's a lot of nonsense,
Yeah,
obviously, spoken about Crowley, and there's a lot of the religious right get caught up in
yeah.
nonsense and making up
He was an
stories
occult
and things.
genius.
He was,
He
yeah.
was an occult genius. He was. I mean, yeah, he
He
dabbled in
he was a
things that.
genius on a few levels,
Yeah,
I would
I
say, not
believe
just
that.
occult.
I'm fascinated that you studied that as well, because obviously I can now see where this pattern has gone on in your life. And when did you
Well,
start?
it was
Go on.
sorry.
No, go.
It was the natural, I guess, area to start looking into. If
Hmm.
you're looking into,
Yeah.
if you're having these kinds of experiences, then you want to sort of understand what's going on. And uh, there wasn't much information about parapsychology, but
Hmm.
most of the books on astral projection at the time were coming from the angle of occultism or esoteric practices. So that was really the framework. I became quite skeptical of a lot of the esoteric stuff
Hmm.
because it just didn't really match with reality. So I've refined a lot of it down, I would say, in how I look at things. But it was an important aspect of my development and learning, I would say.
And obviously, I know that you're very science oriented now. Obviously, before then, before you got in, kind of got into this side of things, um, you were just experiential, really, from that point of view, where you were diving into different things as well. But what got you? What got you more into the science of it? Because you've taken that to another level now.
Um, Actually, I think a lot of the Crowleyan stuff and a lot of that approach does give a lot of respect to science. So I
Hmm.
think that might have been an initial opening of the door, if you like, towards that kind of thing. Because I think one of Crowley's mottos is the aim of religion, the method of science, and I think that is still very much how I see things. I think religion is very toxic, and I'm not a fan of religion. Um,
Here,
and
here.
I think science can also become dogmatic and close-minded and things like that. So I think that sort of approach of trying to focus on the scientific method and be open-minded and look at things in a very like Shoshen, like the Buddhist idea of Shoshen, the
Hmm.
beginner's mind. You approach everything as if it's fresh, so you don't go in with this assumption that something cannot be true and something cannot work. You
Which is
test
what
it
we
and see
find
what
from a
see
lot
what
of.
happens.
This is what we find from a lot of skeptics. I mean, and pseudo skeptics is that they
Mm.
tend to not even understand the research that has been done in psi, and in parapsychology and refute it. I mean, there's been many times where we've spoken to skeptics. Recently, I have as well, and I asked them if you read that paper, and they haven't. They haven't read the research. They don't understand it, and I think that that's a massive imbalance that we have to cope with.
Yeah, it happens both ways. You get the skeptics who go in with preconceptions, and then you get different ideologies and religions, and people go in with those preconceptions. So it's very important to try and strip those away, whichever angle you're coming from, really, I think. And I guess that's the approach I started to take, because I started to look more and more at what was out there and
Mm.
test things more and more. And because I started so young, and I was already working with Douglas Baker, for example, who's an esoteric author and was teaching astral projection, I started working with him when I was about 14 or 15. So it was like my first weekend job was working with an astral projection author.
That was your
So
first
for him,
weekend job, when most of us are doing. Most of us are like working in like toy stores, or doing
yeah.
newspaper rounds and delivering milk. You were working with someone on out of body experiences. That's fascinating.
Yeah. And he was coming from a very Alice Bailey,
Oh
David
yes.
Eater, the whole esoteric sort of angle, the theosophical sort of angle. So I learned a lot of that sort of stuff. But he would say things. I remember a really key moment when he said to me, "But because you're under 18, of course you can't see in color in an out of body experience."
Okay, that's a bit
And
weird.
I'd always seen in color, and actually very vivid color as well, like almost, yeah, crazily vivid color. So that I think was the first seed of maybe some of these things that they write in these books isn't all true. So I started to maybe look into it and sort of look at my experiences and keep a diary and things like that, which is another great thing
Mm.
that comes from the magical orders, that they really encourage keeping a diary. They call it the magical memory. So this idea of like you record your journey, but what's useful with that is you can go back and you can cross reference and you can look at when your experiences happened, how they happened, what the
Yeah.
context, all of that kind of thing. So I started to question and look into them, and I found more and more that the preconceptions that I'd read about in many of the books were not matching with what I was experiencing. And over time, the same thing has happened. I've more and more looked at the many, hundreds of people I've engaged with and worked with over the years, and I've seen themes that again contradict a lot of the writings. For example, a lot of people think in terms of astral bodies, but actually the majority of people don't experience an energy body in an out of body experience. Something like 70% of people don't. Depending on what stats you look at, between 60 and 70% don't experience an energy body. Only a tiny percentage experiences
That's
it.
really interesting, Graham, because a lot of look, I've read a lot of accounts of OBEs of people and people that have written books about OBEs, and there's
Mm,
always something in it that's like it doesn't quite add up to me, because I'm not really feeling it, and I'm not really feeling that there's any evidence there. And essentially, what I'm reading is like, well, I could almost create that just sitting in a meditation in my mind and have that experience and say it's an OBE. And I'll get onto your, because you've done very evidential stuff, which I love. But I think there's, I know, maybe is it a part of ego, or is it bias? Maybe there's some kind of bias within them that just creates this, because I haven't found anything. Well, not anything. Let's see. I haven't. Most of what I found, it could pick holes in all day, because it doesn't seem to have a basis of really any science or even any evidential trail of it. And that's something that you've worked very hard for, I know, over the years.
yeah. Well, I think what's common is, I guess, in a lot of things in human beings, is this tendency to go with the pre-established pattern of things and just sort of repeat what the previous generation said, or what you read in a particular book,
Hmm.
or whatever, and it will, people will keep going with that, and they won't try and say, let's take a step back, and let's look at it again and say, is this actually what's going on? Is this really how the experience is working? And I've tried to do that. I've tried to say, what are the real qualities of an out of body experience? How does the vision work, for example? Most people just assume vision in out of body experiences is exactly the same as physical vision, which makes no sense. But most people just have that assumption. Even in the science, you see the near death experience research, they'll use sort of signs and things, but they won't actually look at, do people ever report seeing things like that in out of body experiences? And the answer is they don't. What most people see is small three-dimensional objects.
Yeah.
So why don't we use small three-dimensional objects as targets? So, it's things like that. If you don't look carefully at the details, then you can just make these assumptions that seem obvious but actually are not obvious. When I've examined my own vision in out of body experiences, I find that there's a real variation between how I perceive things. So when we talk about evidence, which usually is based upon visual perception, so me in an out of body experience seeing something that I couldn't see via my ordinary senses and then reporting that back. So how I see, or how we see in these experiences, is essential if we're going to get evidence and we're going to build up that framework.
And is that kind of like remote viewing? Sorry, did you break up there?
It froze
Oh,
for
sorry. All
a
right.
couple of
So,
moments.
Massey, you just need to remove that. Is that? It sounds to me that that's also very like remote viewing.
Well, remote viewing, actually, well, first off, remote viewing is just the name of a protocol, a
A
way of
clairvoyant thing. Yeah.
a way of applying clairvoyance.
Yeah.
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 So um, the difference, I would say, is that an out of body experience is multisensory and much more immersive, and you lose awareness of your physical body. So all of those factors are distinct from something like clairvoyance or remote viewing. And remote viewing often uses non-visual elements as well. Like if you're doing an ideogram, for example, you'll take a pen and then you'll touch the ideogram. So it starts off as a non-visual thing, as a more like a feeling or other senses rather than the visual, and then the visual aspect comes in later as you go through the process. So I would say it's a very physically present form of working with remote viewing, whereas with an out of body experience, it's much more like this multi-sensory, immersive, multi-layered experience. I would say an out of body experience is almost like if you took all of the psychic senses, clairaudience, clairvoyance, everything, and just combined it all together into a full experience. That would be essentially what an out of body experience is like.
And so when you experience these out of body experiences, I notice from listening to one of your other interviews, you say that you're totally conscious all the time. You're not unconscious, or most of the time. You're not. You're. But is there a
Well,
particular pattern to it?
I mean that I'm not sleeping.
You're not sleeping, yeah, but
I'm
you're
not.
going into another
I'm not
state.
conscious. I'm not like aware physically. I'm aware of the out of body experience. But
Yeah,
what I mean is my body that is no longer um, that I'm no longer aware of is not actually in a sleep state. Because a lot of people assume that an out of body experience is a sleep state, and
yeah,
you're
they
having
do,
a
yeah.
dream.
Hmm.
And so I emphasize that for that reason, that I'm not asleep, I'm not dreaming, I'm in something akin to a trance state would
Yes,
be. And I know that because of looking at my brain waves, looking at my breathing patterns, looking at all of the usual cues like rapid eye movement, all of
yeah.
that sort of thing. And I've looked at all of that, and I'm not in a sleep state. And we also have the research that confirms that with different people, like
Mhm.
a study in Canada where they did an fMRI scan on a volunteer who could induce out of body experiences, and again they found that her brain was not consistent with what you would expect of someone who
Wow.
was asleep or dreaming.
And also just to confirm as well that you don't You don't have your out of body experience and then see your spirit body as what people think you do. You're just conscious in that experience of everything else that's around you, not necessarily seeing a body as some people have claimed.
I sometimes see my physical body, like I'm looking back at my physical body. That has happened and does happen,
Yeah.
but more commonly these days, I'm more like a traveling awareness, which is actually the most common
Right.
form of out of body experience, is more
Yeah.
like a traveling consciousness.
So you're not looking down and seeing your legs and your feet and stuff like that. So as a lot of
It
people would
has
think,
happened.
has it really? Because a lot of people will say that, and I kind of like, okay, I don't get that, because why would you if you're
Look, I think that out of body experiences are part construct, part psychological construct, and
right?
part
Okay,
objectively real experience.
right,
I think that's what's going on with things like the silver cord, which
right.
is very rare. People only see it like with my students, it's something like less than 1%. But in general scientific literature, the report of the silver cord can be up to about 10%, but it's still very minor. And I think probably it's related to sleep paralysis. I have a
Hmm.
suspicion that
Right.
I suspect the reason my students almost never see one, literally, I don't remember anyone saying they've seen one in the last 10 years, for example. I think it's probably because their experience, the people who do see them, it's probably because their experiences are happening via sleep paralysis, which I think is kind of like a different phenomena, really.
So let's. Is there a pattern to how your out of body experience would begin and then move through those kind of stages to the separating your consciousness there?
Usually a shutdown of my physical body to some degree. It feels
Mm.
like my body goes into almost like a suspended animation or a trance like state. I can feel like a shift in my body. Then that leads to a vibrational state often, which feels in my case like an electrical current running through my body, almost like water, but electrical. And then I will focus my attention away from my physical body, and there'll either be a lifting up sensation or I will just find myself somewhere else. It's essentially the process.
And have you had any different experiences with your senses? Like, for instance, as that process is happening, does your senses become, I don't, maybe more vivid, like a clairaudient type sense, or even just physically hearing that's more exacerbated in that stage?
Um, Sometimes it does depend on the experience. I have more, what I would say, more ordinary type experiences where my visual experience is quite basic and ordinary.
Mhm.
And then there are experiences in duotone. There's a lot of these two-tone, two-colored experiences that I've had over the years. The rarest one is what I call the cerulean state, which is the one where I've had precognitive OBEs and veridical objective OBEs. Um, and also there's a yellow green one as well, which is also I've had veridical experiences with. And then it goes through to um, sort of almost like heat vision kind of
Mhm.
vision. So, and then very very vivid crystalline type vision that looks very much like physical reality but sharper than physical reality. I do. I'm short sighted, so I do wear glasses when I'm looking at things at a
Right.
distance. But in the out of body experience, it's sharper than my actual physical vision.
So there's a lot of OBE experiences that say that when they have OBEs, they go over to what people would understand as the spirit world, and they roam around the spirit world and visualize it and bring back evidence or bring back information. Has that been the same thing for you, or is that something that you've never experienced, or would
Yeah,
question from a scientific point of view?
I I do question it from a scientific point of view. I do have experiences like that. So when I was exploring the more esoteric side of things
Mm,
early on, a lot of those experiences turned out to be quite illusory. And I think that was a lot to do with these preconceptions that I spoke about,
Yes.
and going into it with the assumption of how things were and how things worked. And over time, I've stripped that away, and that's allowed me to have much more consistent and objective experiences. So I think that you have to strike a balance with these experiences where you can
Mm.
try to separate the wheat from the chaff, if you like, and try to get to the core of the
Yeah.
experience. So the experiences with something along the lines of an afterlife that I put emphasis on are the ones that there was something evidential to them again. So one example is an experience I had of a plane crash where I didn't see the plane crash, but I was in this misty, cloudy, very stereotypical sort of afterlife type
Yeah.
environment. No up, no down, just sort of cloudy and
Yeah.
serene, essentially. And I saw this group of people that I wrote in my diary. There was about 150 people, and they seemed to be of Russian or Ukrainian descent, that sort of area. And they seemed to be workers, and they were, one of them I remember had this very, very outside kind of looking skin, like he'd been out, and he was having an experience with his, I think, with his father. Like I was literally seeing his life review. I literally could see
Wow.
the images that were in his mind, and he was going through this life
Wow.
review process. And the main feature of this life review was his father. I think it was his father. I don't know for sure, but I think it was
Yeah.
his father.
Yeah.
And so they looked very similar, and they both had this very kind of leathery skin. And I remember watching him, and there was this struggle going on. He was really sort of having a difficult time. So there was obviously some tension or emotional relationship issue with his father that I was literally seeing, and he was going through in this moment. And then I remember looking across the group, and there was I think it was a woman on the far side, and she was having a much easier process, and she went through this life review very quickly, and she moved into the mist, the cloud, whatever,
Mm.
and she sort of disappeared. So I remember interpreting this all as this, they were going through this process of passing over, going from one area
Mm.
to the next, and I had this strong feeling that I couldn't go any closer.
I was
I
going
was
to ask you,
about,
but why? I mean, why would do you think? Why would you be allowed to see their life review? I think would that be
well, I
is
don't think in those terms. Allowed by who?
well that is I kind of think because I'm kind of thinking well that's a bit nosy, isn't it? Watching what their life had gone through, but I suppose you know everything's connected anyway. But it just for me it seems to be that I would have thought you know that your life review would have been personal and you know not open for everybody to see. It's
Well,
interesting how you've experienced that.
that makes sense, but you know, I'm just reporting on what I saw.
It's
I don't know
fascinating.
why I saw it.
Yeah.
But then the thing was, the evidential aspect of this
Mm.
was, then when I returned to my physical body, it turned out that there had been a plane crash. There was a report, I think it was on the news at the time, about a plane crash in Svalbard, the island owned by Norway.
Wow.
It's really far up in the Arctic circle, and everyone had been killed. And it was about, I think the actual number was about 141 or 44,
Wow.
somewhere around there. People had died, and it had happened exactly at the same time as when I'd been having this experience. So that was really the first experience that made me say, okay, this is really suggestive of some kind of afterlife or passing over process, etc.
Did
So
that throw
that,
you into the science, you know, wanting to understand the parapsychology side or the science of it from that experience? Because was that your first really evidential, real strong evidential thing that you had that made you wake up and go, right, okay, I need to know more about this?
No, I would say I'd had evidential experiences before that. The first evidential one I had was going into the upstairs room of a terraced house near Portobello Road Market,
All right,
and
yeah.
I had this out of body experience. I went into the upper floor, and this was in the 90s, sort of before the internet, and he had letterhead paper laid out on a desk, and I was able to perceive the name of the man who lived there,
Wow.
and then I also saw the postcode on the street sign outside, the W11. So
Wow.
I knew his postcode, I knew his name, and I knew the rough location of where he lived because of, knowing that I'd gone down Bayswater Road and then I'd turned off
Yeah.
Bayswater Road near Notting Hill, and I knew the
And
route
you
that I'd
weren't
taken.
connected to this gentleman. You had
No,
no
no.
connections
I'd
at all.
never even been to that street in my life. So,
Wow. That's phenomenal, Graham.
and that was the first evidential one. So that one really kind of, and it goes for, I then looked it up in the Yellow Pages, and I found that it was all correct, what I'd seen. I did even phone him, but I chickened out.
Did you? Well, I think he would have had something to say if you phoned him up and said, "Oh, by the way, I
I
saw
did
your
phone him
letterhead."
up. I did.
You did actually phone him.
Yeah, I did.
How did he take
I
it?
honestly did. I did it from a phone box.
I got 10 pence in the phone box disguising your voice. Oh my
Yeah, no,
God.
I phoned him from a phone box, and when he answered, I just didn't know what to say, really. So I ended up just hanging up, and then he phoned me right back, but I didn't answer, and I just said, well, what am I going to say to him? So I just let it go in the end.
Oh my
But
God.
yeah, that was the first time I had like proper evidence, and then I had quite a lot after that. And then obviously the Soho bombing, precognitive out of body experience was probably my most
I know.
powerful.
I remember you talking about that in an interview you had, actually. You talked about the Soho bombing. And was that before it happened? Was that precognitive, or was that just at the same time?
It was 5 days before, so it was precognitive.
Do you think then that when you
Um,
have the out of body experience that you are going into, like, let's just say, for labels like the spirit world, that dimension, that you're able to perceive, there's no time or space, and you're able to perceive the possibilities or what is coming up or what is happening at that time? How do you explain the
again,
time?
I try not to explain things that I don't have an explanation for, because
But that's
that's
why
the
you do the
problem that
science, to try
most
and
people
figure
get.
it out. Oh, I think you've frozen. Oh,
How such a thing is possible. But I'm reporting what happened, and that particular experience was witnessed by 4 other people. I had an out of body experience with 4 other people in the room,
wow.
um, and I told them all what I saw immediately after the out of body experience. So, and it was all recorded within a couple of hours. Everything was written down by me and by the others who were
That's
present.
crazy.
So that one, again, there's no logical explanation. I said it was precognitive. I said that I felt
Yeah.
that it was going to happen. And then 5 days later, it did happen on the street that I said it would happen, on the side of the street that I said it would happen,
Mm.
about the right distance I said it would happen. Everything was in. I said it was in a bar, and it was in a bar. It was in a pub called the Admiral Duncan.
Yeah, I
So
remember that. Yeah. That's crazy. So I mean, I love the fact that, for me, to bring science to spirit work is very, very important. I've always been that way, academically minded, if you like, and wanting to make sure that the science is right. I don't want to just take anything for granted. What got you into the whole science of it? Because you've done a lot of research now, and obviously working with the Rhine Education and various other organizations. I mean, you're heavily steeped into this, which I love.
I guess it was possibly even the skeptics. I
Really?
suppose
Yeah.
might have pushed me in that direction, because up until that point, I'd always been quite comfortable that I'd proved it for myself.
Yeah.
But then I think a skeptic probably said to me one day, like, "Well, if it's true and if you can do these kind of things, why don't you do some science and prove it?" And I was like,
All right.
"Okay, that's a good point. Yeah, why not? Makes sense." So I contacted Rupert Sheldrake, and I set up some telepathy experiments with him. That's what ended up happening, and took part in a precognitive experiment with him. So that was where I really started with it all. And again, we got positive results. I got the highest score he'd ever got in
Wow.
a precognition experiment. So that was really the starting of working with the science. And then a few years after that, I'd been reading a lot about all of the parapsychology, getting very into the work of Dean Radin and
Yeah. Hmm.
the Institute of Noetic Sciences, the Rhine, all these different organizations. I'd been researching all of this stuff quite a lot. So then I went over to IONS and I gave a talk at IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, where Dean Radin works. And then I took part in Dean Radin's micro PK experiment.
Oh, tell us
And
about that.
basically,
Tell us how you did that. That
he
was nice.
locked me in this big steel box.
Faraday cage, was
Basically,
it?
it's a Faraday cage,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah, but it's solid steel and it has this big lever on the front.
Wow.
And so I was inside that, and I was with headphones on, and all kind of set up. There's like wires everywhere, and you're in this room, and then there's an interferometer, which is what fires photons for the famous double slit
Oh, double slit
experiment.
experiment. Yeah.
Yeah, so that there was one of those set up, and a light above it, which was basically for your feedback psychically. So what you had to try and do was to influence the collapse of the wave function. You literally affect things on a quantum level, and if you were successful, if you were doing well, the light would get brighter. So
Wow.
you had like feedback, basically. Um, so the headphones had instructions on that would tell you, like, focus now, and then it would say, like, so they had like a control sample. Then it'd
Yeah.
be like, okay, we now want you to do nothing. So I would have to just think about nothing and do something else. But the interesting thing, being in this environment, being at Ions,
Yeah.
having Dean Radin outside the box, and being there and in this intense experience, somehow I think it just, I don't know, it caused some intense experience for me. And I went into the vibrational state, like as if I was going to have an out of body experience. But because I was doing the experiment, I didn't let myself go into the out of body experience. So I just kept having these vibrations.
Right.
And I started to generate a crazy amount of heat, or what felt like a crazy amount of heat. And I was sweating, I was hot, it was like
Wow.
crazy. And after the experiment, they opened the door, and Dean Radin's assistant just said she felt this kind of heat just come out of the room, and
Wow.
she said she'd never seen that before. Like, usually everyone's, because you can't move, you're just in this seat with wires everywhere,
Yeah.
and you know, and I was so hot, and I was so intensely involved in this, and Dean Radin came out to tell me the results, and he said that it had gone in the predicted direction, so i.e. evidence
Right.
for micro PK, and he's now repeated that
Umpteen
many,
times.
many
Yeah.
times, and he's got very good evidence for
Now, how did
micro
you
PK.
interfere? How did you? Because people are going to wonder. Okay, so you were sitting there. I want to know: did you have any anxiety? Was there any kind of, were you nervous in any way? And then when you got to the point where you had to focus and try and collapse the wave, did you just give it an instruction in your mind, like collapse the wave now, or did you use clairvoyant imagery? How did you do that?
I did it visually. Yeah, I tried to, and I tried to, I guess, do it because I was having the vibrations. I tried to almost like send the energy of the vibrations into it.
Right.
So that was kind of what I was trying to do. But I mean, normally I wouldn't have expected to have those vibrations, but in that particular
Wow.
circumstance, it just happened spontaneously. So I figured, let's use that energy. But I was very, very
Focus.
intensely kind of drawn into what was happening. It was quite hard to actually come back to normal after. I felt
Imagine.
quite overwhelmed. But yeah, I had this mental image of, I guess, of the photons, and I was trying to work in that way. And I was using the light quite a lot because the light gave you the feedback of when it got brighter. So I was sort of visualizing the light getting really bright as well. So I was doing maybe a combination of things while I was in there. But um, the more interesting one in terms of the approach that I took was actually the precognitive one with Rupert Sheldrake,
All right.
the one where I got the highest score that he'd ever seen. And the reason that was interesting was because it occurred to me that all of my precognitive experiences to that point had been of emotional, highly charged, dramatic events.
Right.
And I had this theory that, and I still think this is probably true, that experiences that have a big emotional impact are probably creating a bigger ripple, if you like, a bigger impact on people and
Yes.
on the whole thing. So I figured, well, what I should do in this experiment is try when I'm right to try and like make it a really big or on the correct answer to have a really big emotional reaction. So every time I saw the correct answer, I would try and really overdo it and like be like,
Yeah.
that's the correct answer, and like really emphasize it and put loads of emotion into it.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking, well, that'll be easier for me to pick it up in the past. And it seemed to be true because I got, more than anyone else had ever got. So
That is really that is fascinating. How
I
you
was
were
sending it back to myself.
really it is. It's amazing how you were doing that because a lot of people wouldn't think that way, especially when you're in that moment. Now, were you ever because you were taking part in this research? Would you ever were you ever nervous about it? Like, what if I can't do it? What if I, like question, second guessing yourself?
Of course. I mean, whenever you're sort of on the spot and you know that, oh, if I'm taking part in this study and I do
Yeah,
terribly, it's not going to be very good.
I know.
Obviously you want to do well in anything.
Yeah,
So there was a certain degree of that, but then at the same time, I do have a certain degree of self belief in my ability to do those things. So I put a lot of emphasis into it, and those were kind of more like one off experiments. But then with the Rhine, we did a 14-week study, where
yes.
I had to do a different experiment every single week. So
That must have been
that
quite
one was.
challenging to do different level experiments every week for 14 weeks. I mean, that must have been more challenging than the other two.
Oh, of course, yeah, because the other two were just one off
Yeah,
studies. But this one was, yeah, every single week. And obviously you have to fit it around your schedule as
yeah,
well,
yeah.
because we were doing it with, I was living in Estonia at the time, and the experiment was being set up in the US. So I would get an email and I would say that, instructing me to try and perceive a target, and I would then sit down and I tried different methodologies. I did, because I had 14 weeks, I thought, let's see what different approaches might work and not work, etc. So I tried remote viewing. I tried using the Gansfeld method. So
Right,
I really believe in the use of sensory deprivation. It can be very
right.
powerful to get you into a deep state. So I tried using Gansfeld, which is mild sensory deprivation, so you put half ping pong balls over your eyes, or you can get goggles as well, or make
Yeah.
them. And then you listen to pink noise. I sometimes use my own infraliminal sound, which I developed myself, and that has a layer of pink noise as well. You can use white noise, but white noise is a bit more intense. And then I tried to perceive the target that way. And then also when I had an out of body experience, that was what I would call a peak experience, because the ones that are veridical, the ones that are evidential and objective, tend to be these peak experiences that either have the green yellow, the one I call the cerulean state, sorry, the one I call the crystalline state, or the blue gray, blue green state that I call the cerulean state. So if I get either of those, I know that I can potentially do something veridical, objective. I can perceive the targets. So I did. I did it via out of body experiences as well. And
What was the
interestingly, the ones that
strongest? What was the
I was
strongest?
just going to
Oh,
say,
yeah.
the strongest was the out of body experience one.
Right. Okay. I would expect that would be. I think Alex Tannis had a lot of out of body experiences similar to yourself, where he had veridical evidence, and I
Yeah,
don't know how he
he
did
did
it, but
experiments too.
yeah.
Yeah, Alex Tannis is great. Unfortunately, he's not as well known as he should be, I
No, I
think.
know. Cal Cooper
But
did a great book on him.
yeah, Cal Cooper is great. I know Cal.
Yeah.
So um, yeah, so Alex Tannis definitely had a lot of positive results and interesting results. And again, his best results were when he didn't experience a second body, an energy body. It was when he experienced a traveling consciousness. So again, his research, confirms with what I found as well. So
Is there other levels of research that you haven't done yet that you're like, I feel this would be important that you're maybe working on?
I think there's so much still needs to be done with OBE research. I mean, there's lots needs to be looked at and details prized out. That, like I was mentioning before, at the moment I'm probably most interested in the phenomenology of out of body experiences. So how the vision works,
Yeah.
what might be going on. I've been looking into things like scotopic vision, which is basically low light vision. Because what I did was I said, okay, when you have an out sorry
That's all right.
when you have an out of body experience, you have these differences in the way you perceive, and you see light, or you see the environment that you're seeing in the out of body experience. What in physical vision resembles these kinds of things that people are experiencing while they're out of body?
Wow,
Is
that
there
is,
anything
yeah.
similar with our optical system? And I thought if we start to think about that, that might give us clues to what's actually going on with the out of body experience. So I started to look in, is there an instance when people see grey green physically? Is there a time when that happens? And I discovered that there is, and it's called scotopic vision. And it's basically when you're in a low light environment, your vision usually works on cones and rods,
Hmm.
and it switches from one to the other when you go into low light conditions. And when you're in the low light conditions, you start to see in a grey green, blue green, grey green kind of way,
Like a like an
a
like
reduced
like an infrared type vision.
kind of like real infrared, yeah, the
Right.
kind of greyish, yeah. So that's sort of the sensitivity changes when you're in dark conditions.
Does the
So
level of perception change as well, Graham?
not in a physical sense, I don't believe, but I think it's just an optical shift.
Right.
But when we think about something like an out of body experience, if it's the brain is picking up information, let's say,
Hmm.
or we're having an experience where there is data coming in from some unknown source, the brain is possibly trying to construct a picture from that data. If we think about like normal vision, you've got light and photons, all the information coming into the photoreceptors,
Yeah.
and then your brain is putting together an image, a structure from that, and then creating the scene. Well, what if something similar is happening, but instead of it being photons, it's psi, it's some kind of data coming
Right.
from some unknown source in a psychic context. We don't know how that works yet or in what context, but most
Fascinating.
people in psi research believe that somehow there is information getting into the brain. And then that information is being translated into images, pictures, sounds, etc. So I think possibly what might be going on is the brain is misunderstanding what it's perceiving and then building up a fragmented picture, and filling in some of the gaps. And that's when you get this, what I call sort of psychological overlay, these elements that are constructs that are not actually part of the reality.
No.
But then you have this essence, which is the real stuff of the experience. So that's when I am able to see things accurately, and you get positive results in psi research. So
So let me ask you this, because I ask every researcher this. It's one of my questions that I just have to ask, right? Is do you believe or perceive that the mind is in the brain, or the brain is an expression of the mind? And therefore, dependent on what you say, is it could it be that what you're perceiving or what you're experiencing is not from the brain but coming from the mind?
well, answer is I think it's both. I think
Okay.
it's in the brain and outside of the brain. A bit like the way we could say right now, is this conversation happening in my computer, or is it happening in your computer, or is it happening outside?
Oh, very good answer. Yeah, nobody's that's very good, Graham. Nobody's normally gone had that. Yeah, I get it. It's like, rather than like the radio. Is it the signal from the radio? Is it the actual radio? Is it the actual machine that's picking it up? So it's
Well, I think in the context of the brain, I think it's both. I
right.
think the TV radio analogy is a bit sort of old school.
It is. I wrote about that because it was the only one I knew about when I wrote a rebuttal against. I wrote a rebuttal against a doctor. It was the first rebuttal I've ever written, and he mentioned that the soul didn't exist, or it was in the brain or something, and if it did, it was in the brain. And I was like totally perturbed against it. So I thought, okay, I got Paranormal Daily News. I'm going to write a rebuttal against this. So I did, and I did use that old school analogy, but it seemed to go down well. And I did,
Well, I mean, it's a solid argument in the
it
sense
is.
that you can look inside and you're not going to find the pictures and all the rest of it. But we do have strong correlates that would suggest that there is some kind of information storage in the brain. So I think the brain is more analogous to a computer than to a television,
Mm.
but more like a computer that's connected to the internet, let's say.
Now I want to get because I want to jump onto this because I took a note of this. I know about white noise and everything else, and obviously we have the Monroe Institute where they have their thing. But you've developed something called infraliminal. Let's talk about this that you developed and how it benefits you, or how it came around.
Well, back in the late 90s, I was creating immersive structures. Partly to do with my interest in sensory deprivation and things like that. I've always been interested in, okay, how can we make the process of causing out of body experiences or initiating out of body experiences better as well? So I've had the interest to learn what an out of body experience is and how we can better prove it, how we can
Mm.
improve the veridical elements of it. But I'm also very interested in how we can more consistently induce out of body experiences. So I started to experiment with structures. Back sort of around that time, I also, part of my sort of esoteric practices and things, I'd I tried what's called the witch's cradle, which is basically where you suspend yourself upside down, and
It
it's quite
doesn't
an
sound
effective.
good, Graham. It does.
No, but it's quite an effective methodology. But obviously not for everyone.
No.
So I wanted to find a way that could be used for a lot of people. So I started to look into things like virtual reality,
Mm.
immersive structures. So I created a structure that lifted the person off of the ground and was sort of holding them off the ground. So it was recreating this kind of floating sensation. It was built with very thin wires. There's a picture of it on my website. I can
I've seen it
link
actually.
to.
Yeah.
Oh, you've seen it, yeah.
Yeah.
So that structure gave that sensation like you were floating, but there was one problem. I needed something more than that. And I was thinking a lot along the lines of we need something that's multisensory,
Right.
not just visual, not just physical, not just hearing, whatever. We need something that's multisensory. And I still very much believe that that's the best way to go. So I thought, well, what about hypnosis? What if I use hypnosis to help to get people into an out of body experience? So I started learning about hypnosis. I did a course on Ericksonian hypnosis. I did a course on neurolinguistic programming, looked into all of the approaches with hypnosis, and I created some hypnotic inductions to go with the structure. So when someone got on the structure, there would then be the audio playing. But then I wanted to take it a step further than that as well, because okay, hypnosis is one thing, but what if we could help to get to that vibrational state? So I thought, well, how can I learn about my own vibrational state, and how can I maybe see if there's a way to induce it? I tried hemisync
Yeah.
or binaural beats,
Yeah.
but I'd never had any success with them. For me personally, I'm sure lots of people have really great results with them, but
Drives
for
me
me
nuts.
personally, sorry.
It drives me nuts. I've tried it. I can't do it. It drives me nuts. I'm
Okay.
like, nah, this just is not. It's not for me.
Okay, well, I was the same. I wasn't getting anywhere with that. So, but I thought, but sound, it makes sense. Sound
Yeah, it
should be
does.
able to have an impact, and frequency should be able to have an impact on our state. I mean, with music, it can create all these emotional changes and all the rest of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, why couldn't sound do something like that? So, firstly, what we did is we got some neurofeedback equipment, and with a computer were basically looking at what was going on as best we could. I mean, quite basic stuff, but seeing what was going on with my brain in terms of the EEG, basically,
Yeah.
while I was going into the vibrations, um, and then from there trying to recreate that using frequency. So we just experimented, literally
Wow.
tried different patterns. So what if we use this particular kind of frequency? We looked at sort of the types of frequencies you get in, say, Buddhist chanting or different
Mm-hmm.
different practices like that, and then you, distilled them down to a specific tone or pattern of tones, and then saw if that had any kind of impact. And I found that certain tones and certain patterns started to push me in that kind of direction.
It's
So
interesting because when I go into trance, like I've trance mediumships I've done for many years. I've done for a long time now, but there's certain musical vibrations that put me into an easier state than there is with there's some other music I wouldn't even be able to go down because I either get too into it like, why is it go? Or it's just a certain kind of vibration that really puts me into that relaxed state. So this all makes sense.
yeah, so really we just experimented, and we over time, I mean, we this is probably a couple of years at least, we started to find certain frequencies were more effective, and we started to create a pattern.
Wow.
um, and then I created a 20-minute track, was the original version, um, And that 20-minute track I would start to use quite consistently to induce out of body experiences, or at least to get me to the vibrational state. That's what it's designed for.
To do
I'm not
that,
going to
yeah.
make grand claims that it causes the out of
No.
body experience fully. What it does is it gets you to the launch pad, it gets you to the vibrational state, and then you just have to use a technique to do the final step then.
Am I allowed to ask you what that technique is or not? Is that secret?
There isn't one.
There isn't one.
There's many, and it depends on the individual.
Yeah.
What I will say is the number one mistake people make is they focus on techniques, and what
Wow.
they need to focus on is developing the right pre-state, the right foundational
Yeah.
physiological state, mental physiological state for the out of body experience to happen. Then the technique is almost, it's just flipping a switch. It's just it's the cherry on the cake.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the foundational stuff there, no matter what technique you use, it's not going to get you there. You have to have all of that basic, that basis for the experience to arise from. But a lot of people completely ignore that, and they just focus on a visualization technique, or something like that, or a lucid dreaming method, which a lot of people find it very hard to go into lucid dreams. So I think it's important to think about the individual. My book, my second book, that is the practical one, that's about to be re-released.
Oh, is it?
That
We'll put that a link for everybody on the website and also on the show notes.
Yeah, it's not out yet, but in the next couple of months, hopefully, the new edition
Nice.
is coming out, because it's like the special 10th anniversary edition. So I've added in 3
And you
new
teach courses. You
chapters.
actually teach people. You've got do you? Is it? I know you teach with the Rhine Education Centre, which is an amazing place. But you teach your own courses as well.
I have a video course that people can download, so they can just do that in their own time. And then I also do private one-to-one tuition, which is my favorite, because it's the most effective way to learn, because it's like having a coach. You just do it systematically over time. um, Out of body experiences is not something you're going to learn in 10 minutes.
No.
It's something that requires consistent practice, so it's better to have that consistency, which is even better than doing like a workshop or anything like that, because you do a workshop, even if you're there for a week, it's just a week of practice. Whereas with the coaching, I can work with someone potentially for months, and you can really develop that way.
And what's the? I mean, what? I'm going to throw you right under the bus. What's the cost for that for working with you?
The cost.
Yeah. Because
Oh,
if anybody's
sorry.
listening to this and you want to work with him one-to-one, if he's got some spaces, then let's just put it out there.
I don't actually remember the exact amount, but there's they can look at the whole course. There's like a full
Yeah.
sort of 12-week course, and also they can write to me and get all the details and stuff. But I
Well,
don't have
we'll
the
put those
price off the
details
top of my
in,
head.
and certainly I do not endorse many people really in the occult or the esoteric side of things. But we will support that. So anybody who's listening now that wants to go and learn really about the science and also how to do OBEs properly, then this is the person that you need to go to.
Well, the video course, for example, I remember that one's £85. That's it
That's
for the
nothing. I
video
mean,
course.
look, guys, that's
Yeah.
nothing.
And
That
then
yeah,
if you want the video course with the infraliminal, it's I think 115, I think,
which is
off the
nothing.
top of my
And
head.
you
So
say you also
yeah.
sell and I noticed on your site you sell the infraliminal, and also you don't have any more of these left, but you had like a little USB stick or something that you sent them on.
Yeah, they sold out very quickly. Those.
I
Yeah.
wonder why. So, are you going to be bringing
Yeah.
more of them back,
Well,
or just
people
downloads?
like them in terms of sales, but it does feel a little bit unnecessary now with everything with digital
Just
stuff. I
download
mean,
it.
yeah. So I think just doing things in a digital format, it's environmentally damaging and all of that as well.
It's less hassle as well. And how much is the infraliminal to get for people to try that on its own?
Well, there's one is 25, the other one I think is 35, and then the package for both of them is 55.
That's nothing. 55 pounds, guys, not dollars. So don't get yourself mixed up. This is pounds. So that's still very, very, very reasonable. So
I try to keep all the prices like, affordable.
So, before we finish, I could go on for hours and hours with you because I find it fascinating. I love the science. Is there any benefit to people learning the out-of-body experience, either physically or mentally? What's the benefits for people?
Just minor stuff like freedom from fear of death and complete transformation of your life.
I wouldn't say that was minor, Graham. I mean, come on, seriously.
Bit of humor there. No, but I do find it very strange that people actually ask that question. I do find it.
I got it because people are going to ask me. So, what's the benefits of us doing this? And what we ask Graham?
Because it's like I've never heard anyone say that to like a meditation teacher, for example. So, what's the benefits of meditation? What's the benefits of spirituality? I've never heard anyone say that, but I nearly always get asked that with this topic, and I'm like, this will give you direct experience of your spirit if you believe in such a thing.
Yeah.
It's not about, reading about it or believing in it. You're going to have direct, tangible, personal experience of it. If such a thing as a continuation of consciousness or life after death exists, you can explore that directly for yourself. There are healing factors that many people talk about. There's a kind of inner peace and inner calm that comes from the experience that many people report as well. You'll get kind of numerous benefits.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to even a sense of interconnectedness with other life.
I mean, I can see this is throwing kind of right out there, but I mean, I can see this as being partly a therapeutic thing, almost like a holistic therapeutic thing. That not a lot of people know about it, but there you go, guys. The benefits are you can go to a Reiki practitioner or a massage therapist, or you can go to somebody having an out-of-body experience and learn it and maybe do something.
What's actually happening with something like Reiki? I mean, you're working with energy essentially, aren't you? And I think when you have an out-of-body experience, I think I wrote this in my second book. I think the vibrational state is very much akin to the healing modalities that are described, energy healing modalities. So I think you're actually healing yourself by directly working with those energies. I also found that there's a sort of a mental healing, I think, that happens with it as well. Another thing that I didn't mention about the infraliminal was a guy in Ireland called Eamon started working with people who were suffering from various levels of addiction and different issues around substance abuse and things like that. And he started working with them with the infraliminal sound, and many of them had complete transformations. And I met one of them when I went to Ireland to meet with him, and literally we went for a coffee, and this guy had been taking enough drugs to kill the average person on like a daily basis. And in the space of a few weeks of working with the infraliminal sound, he'd got to the point where he was applying to college and he'd got off the drugs.
That's great. That's amazing. That is amazing.
And when Eamon said to him, what would you say you experience when you listen to it? He said, this must be what people mean when they say Zen. That's what he said.
Oh, that's brilliant. I have to be honest. I've never tried this infraliminal. I'm going to try it. Right. I am going to give this a go. And who knows? I might even report it.
The infraliminal one is the one that's had the most development in it, and it's the waking state version. It's the one that is most effectual, I guess, to your psychological state and stuff. So, the other one is more of a pre-sleep programming.
All right.
Track.
So, do you think people that are mediumistic like myself who that have had a long experience of developing mediumship, that this would be another gateway, if you like, or a potential to go deeper into their spiritual connection just through using that.
Definitely. I think mediums tend to do well when I teach mediums, because I think often mediums have, well, they're trained to go into trance, so
Yeah,
they understand what a trance is,
yeah,
and they understand how to go through that process, which is one of the more difficult aspects of me teaching someone. Is I have to get them to understand what an altered state is, or what a trance state is, and how to get to that kind of level. So mediums have a jump start on that already, because they're familiar with. Also, mediums are used to often working in a group, a circle, and
yeah,
kind of
absolutely.
they have the idea of a support structure.
Yeah,
They understand how working with other people can actually be a benefit and a support to the learning process. So mediums often have that advantage, I think, with learning this kind of thing. And like I said, of course, if you want to have a deeper understanding of spirit, you're directly experiencing spirit, your own spirit, with this. You know, so so it makes total sense to be a benefit to mediumship, really.
that's awesome. So what's for you now in the next couple of years? What are you planning? Is there any big plans for your research, or what else would you like to do?
Um, I'm not 100% sure where I'm going yet. I'm sort of going to see where things take me.
Mm,
I'm planning to do a bit of travel. I'm going to Asia, so I'm probably going to do a lot of meditational practice and some different things over there. I want to. I The form of meditation I tend to practice is Zen, so
right.
I will probably go to some Zen temples and things like that while I'm over in Japan. I'm going to go to Japan.
Oh, I love Japan.
Um, yeah,
I
me
love
too.
it. I trained in Japan
Oh, okay.
in martial
So
arts. Yeah.
yeah, I've done martial arts as well, so I may well look into that as well. So
Nice, nice. And so, is there anything else before we finish off? Is there anything that you would like people to know out there about your work, or I mean, obviously let people know how they can get a hold of you, but anything, any tips you can give them, or warnings?
no, I tend to be quite positive about things. I tend to feel that, I mean, I'm not like fluffy about it. I don't think that
No, I know
I
you're
don't
not.
think it's all I don't think it's all new age and all
Yeah,
of that, but I also think that if we compare, like when people talk about dangers and stuff, I often think like, well, um, is it more dangerous than walking down the street, or say having a bath? Like, how many people a year die from any of the things we're talking about in comparison to people who drown in the bath, for
that's true.
example? So, so when we start to talk about risk, we can sort of put things into perspective, and we can think like, I don't think most people get into a bath thinking, "Oh my god," you know.
I'm going to die.
Um,
I'm not coming back.
yeah, so I think with out of body experiences, I definitely think people should look at it more as a healing and a positive thing. Unfortunately, there is a lot of nonsense out there that makes people scared of the experience, but I've looked deeply into every aspect of it, from
Yeah,
the
everybody seems
original.
to be frightened that when they leave their body or they have that experience, they're not going to come back. Like, what happens if I
Yeah,
get
which
stuck
which
there?
is nonsense. I mean, it's quite the opposite. The more likely outcome is that you'll want to stay out longer, and you'll kind of be struggling to stay out longer. That's the more likely outcome. The reality is, I've done a lot of research to look into any, because I think it's my responsibility to, if I'm going to say to people to do this, I've got to be
Yeah,
completely sure, as as much as is humanly possible, that it is completely safe, and I am 100% sure it is. I've found no convincing, compelling evidence of any kind of harm. The only thing that anyone reports is basically that they can have scary experiences related to sleep paralysis. So I tell people, do not learn to have out of body experiences via sleep paralysis. If you do that, you're going to have a waking nightmare. Basically, it won't be an out of body experience, it will be a waking nightmare. um, so if you want to have only positive transformative experiences, then basically the the sort of non-sleep paralysis methodologies
Don't
is the
go
way
to
to
sleep,
go.
ladies and gentlemen. That's what he's saying.
So
Don't
I,
sleep.
I only teach I
Yeah,
only teach non-sleep paralysis methods, basically. So
I
my
love it.
courses are all based upon the safest, most effective methods scientifically.
Awesome. Well, Graham, I want to thank you for being my guest today. I'm so glad I did this. And ladies and gentlemen, if you are listening and you want to learn more about the out of body experience, then I would suggest that you go to Graham's website, which is what, Graham?
GrahamNicholls.com, which
Perfect.
is Nichols with 2 L's.
Yeah. And you're not on much social media, so you don't get found. You just get found there. You can email him.
No, social media is a bit toxic, and
Yeah.
I know it's good for promotion, but it's not all about money and stuff for me.
No.
It is my passion and my love.
And I love that fact, and I really love the fact that you're very scientific and that you've taken part in so many scientific researches out there. So really, ladies, I always say to people, if you really want to learn true mediumship, spiritual development, then you've got to go where the experience is, but you've also got to go where the science is. You can't just take everything for granted and then just believe every willy-nilly thing out there. Look into the science. Ask questions. Don't just believe everything until you come to a place of knowing. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Deadly Departed. I'm so glad that you joined us today. And if you've got any questions, and obviously I would want to bring Graham back and you want to ask questions before he comes back at some point, then please do that. You'll find details about his courses below if you're watching a video or listening to the podcast, and his website. And please go out and buy those books. God bless.